I am Clara, 32 years old, and my stepsister thought her lavish wedding was the perfect place to publicly humiliate me. Standing in front of 200 elite guests, she pointed a manicured finger at me and laughed, calling me just a nurse who empties bedpans. My father laughed right along with her. My stepmother smirked into her champagne. But their amusement shattered when the groom's billionaire father slammed his crystal glass onto the table pointed directly at me and revealed a truth that froze the entire ballroom. Before I share how I dismantled their fake wealthy lives in under 5 minutes, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit the like button and subscribe if you love seeing toxic relatives get exactly what they deserve. The ocean breeze swept through the open French doors of the massive historic mansion in Newport, Rhode Island. The salty sea air mixed heavily with the overwhelming scent of thousands of imported white orchids that tumbled from towering crystal vases on every single table. Tonight was the social event of the season, or at least that is what my 29-year-old stepsister Brittany wanted her massive online following to believe. The entire evening felt less like a genuine celebration of marriage and more like a carefully staged production for an influencer lifestyle brand. A string quartet played modern pop anthems in the corner of the room, while waiters in crisp white gloves circulated seamlessly through the crowd, carrying silver trays loaded with truffle caviar and vintage champagne. I sat alone at a small, poorly decorated table pushed all the way to the back of the room, right next to the swinging kitchen doors. I was deliberately placed as far away from the bridal party as physically possible. I wore a simple, elegant navy blue dress, keeping my posture straight and my expression carefully neutral as waiters rushed past me with dirty plates. I had spent my entire life being treated as the embarrassing secret of this family, so the seating arrangement was exactly what I had expected. My father, Howard, and my stepmother, Patricia, were currently holding court at the front of the room, loudly masquerading as high society elites. My father, who is 58 years old, kept nervously adjusting his rented tuxedo. He laughed far too loudly at jokes that were not funny and tried desperately to strike up conversations with anyone wearing a designer watch. Patricia, 55, was poured into a tight sequined gown that caught the chandelier light with every movement. Her face was locked in a permanent haughty smile. They were putting on the performance of a lifetime, trying desperately to hide the fact that their personal finances were completely crumbling. They were using this high-profile marriage as their ultimate salvation, treating the groom's wealthy family not as new relatives, but as a bank to bail them out of their impending ruin. The man Brittany had married was Desmond, a 31-year-old brilliant architect. Desmond is an African-American man from a deeply respected, genuinely wealthy family. He carries himself with a quiet, powerful dignity, valuing honesty, hard work, and integrity above all else. His family does not flaunt their money or seek out the spotlight. His father, Winston, is a 60-year-old self-made billionaire who built a massive healthcare and commercial real estate empire entirely from the ground up through relentless determination. Winston sat at the front table radiating a formidable no-nonsense authority. He wore a perfectly tailored dark suit and watched the flashy spectacle around him with sharp, calculating eyes. You could tell immediately that Winston had absolutely no patience for fools, and I could see him quietly assessing my father's loud, boastful behavior with a healthy dose of suspicion. The extravagant dinner service was finally concluding, and the clinking of heavy gold silverware against fine bone china began to slow down across the ballroom. The wedding planner, a frantic woman wearing a headset, signaled urgently to the lighting technician in the balcony. The massive crystal chandeliers above us dimmed to a soft glow, and a bright, warm spotlight illuminated the center of the polished dance floor. It was time for the toasts. Brittany stood up eagerly, grabbing the microphone from the best man before he had even fully sat down. She wore a custom $15,000 silk and lace gown with a dramatic train that stretched for yards behind her. She paused for a long moment, making absolutely sure the two hired videographers had the perfect lighting and camera angle before she began to speak. Her voice echoed through the massive ballroom, sweet and intensely rehearsed. She started by talking about destiny, looking adoringly at Desmond, who smiled back at her with genuine trusting affection. Then she turned her attention to my parents. She squeezed out a few perfect photogenic tears, carefully wiping her cheeks so she would not ruin her professional makeup. She thanked Howard and Patricia for giving her the most incredible privileged life imaginable, praising them for being her ultimate role models. Howard puffed out his chest, proudly raising his crystal glass high to the applauding crowd. Patricia placed a dramatic hand over her heart, soaking in the attention like a sponge absorbing water. But Brittany was not finished. Her eyes scanned the dark ballroom, searching past the wealthy guests until she found my small table near the kitchen doors. When she locked eyes with me, her sweet, innocent expression dissolved instantly into a vicious, calculated smirk. She signaled the lighting technician again, and suddenly a harsh, blinding spotlight swung across the room, pinning me in my seat for all 200 elite guests to see. "I want to introduce someone very special," Brittany announced into the microphone, her voice dripping with mock sweetness that made my stomach turn. "Everyone, please turn your attention to the back of the room. That is Clara. She is my stepsister." The guests turned in their chairs, their expensive diamond jewelry flashing in the dim light as hundreds of eyes settled directly on me. I did not shrink away or hide my face. I sat perfectly still, resting my hands calmly on the table. "Clara is not used to places like this," Brittany continued, her tone shifting into something mocking and incredibly cruel. "You see, she is just a nurse. She empties bedpans at the public hospital downtown. So please, if you are looking for investment advice or networking opportunities tonight, do not bother asking her. She would not know the first thing about real money or success. Bless her heart, she just cleans up messes for a living." A collective gasp rippled through the massive ballroom, immediately followed by the sound of my father laughing. Howard threw his head back and let out a booming, cruel laugh that sliced through the tense air. He found his own daughter's public humiliation absolutely hilarious. At his side, Patricia lifted her champagne flute to her lips, a wicked, triumphant smirk playing across her face. They loved this moment. They loved seeing Brittany assert her dominance, and they loved seeing me put in my place in front of the exact people they were so desperate to impress. I did not flinch. I slowly reached for my crystal water glass, wrapping my fingers around the cold, condensation-covered surface. I gripped it tightly, anchoring myself to the present reality. My heart was pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs, but I forced my breathing to remain slow and perfectly steady. I kept my chin held high and locked eyes with Brittany across the vast expanse of the ballroom. I refused to give her the satisfaction of seeing me break. I refused to let my father see me cry. I knew the truth about my own life. I knew about the massive private healthcare empire I had quietly built from nothing, and I knew that her $15,000 dress was paid for with stolen funds. I just stared at her, my total silence serving as my only shield against her venom. The cruel laughter from my father encouraged a few of the more obnoxious guests to chuckle awkwardly, but the vast majority of the room fell into a deeply uncomfortable, heavy silence. The cruelty of the moment hung heavily in the ocean air, suffocating the celebratory mood. I shifted my gaze to the groom and saw Desmond. His warm, loving smile had completely vanished. He looked horrified and physically sickened. His brow was furrowed deeply, and he stared at Brittany as if a complete stranger had just taken her place. Desmond valued hard work, humility, and character above all else. Watching his new bride publicly degrade a healthcare worker, let alone her own sister, went against every single moral fiber in his body. He opened his mouth to say something, reaching a hand out to stop her from speaking any further. But before Desmond could utter a single word, before I could even formulate a response to the massive humiliation, a sharp, incredibly loud noise cut through the tension. It was the unmistakable sound of heavy crystal slamming against a solid mahogany table. The noise was so sudden, so aggressive that the string quartet jumped and stopped playing entirely. The servers froze with their silver trays suspended in midair. The uncomfortable chuckling from my father died instantly in his throat. Every single person in the ballroom turned their heads toward the front of the room. Winston had stood up. The 60-year-old billionaire pushed his heavy dining chair back with such incredible force that it scraped loudly against the marble floor. He stood at his full height, an imposing, terrifying figure of absolute authority. His face was a mask of furious disbelief. He did not need a microphone. The sheer power of his presence commanded the entire room, forcing everyone into stunned submission. He ignored Howard, who had suddenly stopped laughing and was now sweating visibly under the bright lights. He ignored Patricia, whose smug smirk had evaporated into pure panic. He ignored Brittany, who was standing frozen on the dance floor, clutching the microphone as if it were a life raft. Winston bypassed all of them completely. He raised a steady, powerful hand and pointed a finger directly through the crowd, aiming straight past the sea of wealthy guests, straight past the extravagant floral centerpieces, right to my small table by the kitchen doors. He locked eyes with me. The furious confusion on his face shifted into absolute stunned recognition. He took a deep breath, and his booming voice carried across the dead silent ballroom, freezing the blood of every toxic relative in the room. Wait, you are the girl who... The billionaire did not wait for an answer or an invitation to approach. Winston shoved his heavy mahogany dining chair back with such tremendous force that it shrieked against the polished marble floor of the ballroom. He marched across the expansive dance floor with the terrifying momentum of a freight train. The heavy silence in the room amplified the sharp, authoritative sound of his leather shoes striking the ground. The elite guests parted like the Red Sea, rapidly pulling their expensive silk gowns and custom-tailored suit jackets out of his path. They recognized absolute power when they saw it, and Winston radiated a lethal, uncompromising intensity that commanded immediate submission. My father panicked instantly. Howard leaped from his seat at the decorated head table, his face suddenly slick with a thick layer of nervous sweat. He rushed forward, attempting to intercept the billionaire before he could reach my isolated table. Howard stepped directly into Winston's path, holding his hands up in a placating, subservient gesture. He stammered out a frantic greeting, desperately trying to redirect the wealthy patriarch back to the VIP section. My father insisted loudly that there had simply been a minor misunderstanding, assuring Winston that the catering staff could handle any logistical issues in the back kitchen, so the billionaire would not have to trouble himself with the hired help. Winston did not even break his formidable stride. He swatted my father aside with the back of his hand as if brushing away a mildly annoying insect. Howard stumbled backward, his shiny rented tuxedo shoes slipping on the marble, nearly knocking over a massive crystal vase filled with imported white orchids. Winston kept his piercing dark eyes locked solely on me until he stopped directly in front of my tiny undecorated table near the swinging kitchen doors. He stared down at me, his sharp gaze scanning my features, verifying the identity he already knew to be true. He took a deep breath, and his booming voice resonated across the silent ballroom without the need for a microphone. "You are Clara Winston," stated his tone carrying an absolute, unshakable certainty. "You are the woman who stayed on the secure satellite phone for 4 straight hours during a massive blizzard. You bypassed 3 regional hospital directors to get my wife on that medical chopper. The local emergency doctors told me she had less than 20 minutes to live, and your network tore through every single piece of bureaucratic red tape in the state of Colorado to save her life." Up on the elevated dais, Brittany gripped the wireless microphone so hard her knuckles turned stark white. Her perfect, meticulously curated influencer facade was cracking violently, replaced by a desperate, ugly panic that she could not hide from the cameras. She forced a high-pitched, nervous laugh that echoed awkwardly through the expensive sound system. She leaned into the microphone, frantically trying to gaslight her new father-in-law and the entire room. She tried to assure the billionaire that he was horribly confused. She insisted loudly that I was just a low-level public clinic worker who struggled to pay basic rent. Brittany claimed I could never afford to coordinate a private helicopter rescue, let alone have high-level access to a secure satellite phone network. She told the quiet room that the intense stress of the wedding planning must be getting to Winston's head. She flashed a fake, terrified smile and suggested everyone raise their champagne glasses for another romantic toast, desperately attempting to distract the elite crowd from the disastrous scene unfolding in front of them. Winston turned his body slowly. The sheer lethal intensity of his glare made Brittany snap her mouth shut, instantly cutting off her frantic rambling. The microphone emitted a sharp, highly unpleasant screech of feedback before the frantic sound technician in the balcony muted her audio channel entirely. Winston folded his muscular arms across his chest. He addressed Brittany with a voice dripping in absolute unapologetic disdain. "Do not ever insult my intelligence," Winston commanded firmly, his words slicing through the heavy ocean air. "I never forget a face, I never forget a name, and I certainly never forget the name of the brilliant person who holds the ultimate authority over the most elite private medical network on the entire East Coast." Winston turned his body back around so the entire ballroom of 200 guests could hear him clearly. He pointed an authoritative finger at me again. "This woman is not a public clinic bedpan cleaner. She is an advanced practice registered nurse and the sole founder and chief executive officer of Apex Concierge Care. In fact, my private equity firm spent the last 8 months aggressively pursuing her highly profitable company. Just last Thursday, we finalized a $15 million merger to integrate her proprietary medical logistics software into our national healthcare portfolio." A collective dramatic gasp erupted from the 200 guests. The wealthy socialites who just minutes ago had been laughing cruelly at my expense were now staring at me with wide eyes, their jaws practically hitting the floor. Furious whispers broke out instantly across the white tablecloths. People were rapidly putting the scattered pieces together, realizing that the quiet, unassuming woman shoved into the back corner by the kitchen doors was actually the most powerful, self-made millionaire in the entire building. The social hierarchy of the room inverted in a matter of seconds. Standing near the front of the room, Desmond became completely rigid. The handsome groom stared up at Brittany, his dark eyes filling with absolute, unfiltered disgust. He was a man who prized authenticity, transparency, and relentless hard work, having built his own architectural career from the ground up without riding his father's billionaire coattails. Watching his new bride publicly degrade a brilliant life-saving medical chief executive purely out of petty, childish jealousy disgusted him to his very core. The horrifying realization that Brittany had lied to him about my entire existence, painting me as a deadbeat charity case to artificially elevate her own social status, washed over his face in real time. Back at the decorated head table, every single drop of color drained from my father's face. Howard looked as though he might physically collapse onto the floor. Patricia looked exponentially worse. Her heavy, expensive makeup could not hide the sickly ashen gray tone her skin had suddenly taken on. They were completely broke, facing imminent financial bankruptcy, and had spent the last 2 years treating me like absolute garbage while kissing Brittany's feet. Now, standing right in front of them was the powerful billionaire they desperately needed to impress, publicly bowing down with deep respect to the very daughter they had just mocked. Patricia, always the ruthless, opportunistic survivor, immediately tried to salvage the burning wreckage of their social reputation. She plastered on a terrifyingly fake, wobbly smile and rushed frantically across the polished dance floor. She pushed her way aggressively past Winston and reached her manicured hands out toward me, acting as though she had known this incredible financial information all along. She projected her shrill voice so the surrounding elite guests could hear her desperate, pathetic pivot. "Clara, my sweet girl," Patricia exclaimed, clapping her hands together joyfully. "We are simply bursting with immense pride over your little medical startup." She claimed loudly that Brittany was just making a playful, harmless sibling joke, and that their family had always fiercely fostered a spirit of intense entrepreneurial success in all their children. She reached out a trembling hand to touch my shoulder, acting like the supportive, loving, deeply involved stepmother she had never once been in her entire life. I did not let her fingers make contact with my navy blue dress. I stood up from my small dining chair, slowly, carefully smoothing out the fabric of my skirt. I looked Patricia dead in the eyes, my expression completely devoid of any warmth, forgiveness, or familial affection. I let the heavy silence stretch for a long, agonizing moment, making absolutely sure the entire room, including Winston and Desmond, was hanging on my every single movement. The guests leaned in closer, desperate to witness the fallout. Then I opened my small evening clutch. I pulled out a thick, heavy stack of folded bank receipts and corporate financial statements. I slammed them down hard onto the crisp white tablecloth right next to my crystal water glass. The sharp smacking sound echoed loudly in the quiet space. I held Patricia's terrified gaze, preparing to drop the first piece of heavy financial artillery that would completely incinerate their fake stolen wealthy lifestyle permanently. Proud, I repeated the word, letting it hang in the thick ocean air like a physical weapon. I stared directly into Patricia's panicking eyes, refusing to let her play the role of the loving, supportive stepmother for even a single second longer. You claim to be bursting with immense pride over my medical startup. Is that why you felt completely entitled to use my corporate credit card to pay the $50,000 deposit for this exact ballroom? Patricia recoiled as if I had just slapped her across the face. The fake wobbly smile instantly vanished from her heavily contoured features, replaced by a mask of sheer terror. She looked down at the stack of bank receipts I had slammed onto the pristine white tablecloth, her manicured hands trembling uncontrollably. She opened her mouth to speak, but only a pathetic, breathless squeak emerged. She looked around the room, desperate to find an escape route, but there was nowhere to hide. Those are the finalized transaction records, I stated clearly, making sure my voice carried to the surrounding tables. The elite guests leaned in closer, their expensive jewelry sparkling, as they listened to every single word of our confrontation. I pulled these records directly from my company accounting department yesterday morning. They detail a massive unauthorized charge made to the Apex Concierge Care primary expense account. The billing address matches your home in Boston, and the merchant is listed as the Newport Grand Hotel Events Department. You stole my company financial information to fund Brittany's lavish influencer fantasy. I had worked 80-hour weeks for 5 straight years to build Apex Concierge Care from a tiny concept into a highly profitable enterprise. I had sacrificed holidays, sleep, and personal relationships to ensure my nurses were paid well and my patients received world-class treatment. And in one single afternoon, my stepmother had casually swiped a massive chunk of operating capital just so her golden child daughter could have imported silk tablecloths and a designer wedding cake. The sheer entitlement was absolutely breathtaking. Howard practically sprinted across the polished marble dance floor, his face flushed a shade of crimson. He shoved his way past the frozen catering staff, his rented tuxedo jacket flapping wildly behind him. He reached our table, panting heavily, his eyes darting frantically toward Winston, who was watching the entire exchange with cold, calculating intensity. Winston stood perfectly still, his powerful arms crossed over his chest, absorbing every detail of my parents' fraudulent behavior. "Clara, keep your voice down," Howard hissed through clenched teeth. He leaned across the table, his breath reeking of expensive scotch and sheer desperation. He reached out with a sweaty hand to grab the stack of receipts, but I swiftly slammed my palm down on top of the papers, pinning them securely to the tablecloth. I glared at him, refusing to yield an inch of ground. "We can discuss this privately later," Howard whispered furiously, glancing around at the wealthy socialites who were now openly staring and pointing at him. "This is private family business. You are ruining your sister's special day over a simple accounting error. I promise I will pay you back every single cent after the honeymoon. Just put the papers away and smile. Play along for tonight." Howard pleaded, his voice cracking with a pathetic vulnerability he usually reserved for his creditors. "We are family, Clara. You have to protect us." "Family business," I asked, my voice rising in volume. "You call committing corporate fraud family business? You did not make a simple accounting error, Dad. You deliberately memorized the numbers off my corporate card when I accidentally left my wallet on your kitchen counter during Thanksgiving dinner. You waited 4 months until the exact moment you needed to secure this luxury venue, knowing full well your own credit lines were completely maxed out and your business accounts were frozen." The guests seated at the adjacent tables gasped audibly. A wealthy woman in a designer emerald gown covered her mouth with a diamond-studded hand, whispering frantically to her husband. Howard's face contorted with rage and extreme humiliation. He realized the wealthy facade he had spent years meticulously building was rapidly disintegrating into dust before his very eyes. The people he wanted to impress were now looking at him like he was a common criminal. He leaned closer to me, his voice dropping into a menacing, threatening growl. "Shut your mouth right now, Clara. You are making us look like desperate thieves in front of Desmond's prestigious family. I told Winston I was funding this entire wedding myself. I promised him I had the capital. If you expose this, you will destroy a multi-million-dollar alliance between our families. You will ruin everything I have worked for." I looked at my father, taking in his sweating forehead, his desperate eyes, his utter lack of remorse. He did not care about the fact that he had stolen $50,000 from my hard-earned medical company. He only cared about protecting his fragile ego and maintaining the illusion of immense wealth in front of a billionaire patriarch who actually possessed the financial power my father desperately craved. He wanted to use my sweat to buy his way into high society. I did not back down. I slowly picked up the wireless microphone that the best man had absent-mindedly left, resting on the edge of my table after the previous toasts. I gripped the smooth metal cylinder, feeling the cool weight of it in my palm. I flicked the small switch on the side, ensuring the green indicator light glowed brightly. Howard lunged forward to snatch the device from my hands, but I quickly took a step back, positioning myself completely out of his reach. I raised the microphone to my lips. "Attention, everyone," I announced. My voice boomed through the massive state-of-the-art sound system, echoing off the high-vaulted ceilings and completely drowning out the ambient noise of the ballroom. I have a brief announcement regarding the funding of tonight's extravagant celebration. Howard froze in terror. Patricia let out a strangled cry, burying her face in her hands. Up on the dais, Brittany gripped the edge of the sweetheart table, her perfect influencer smile completely obliterated. My father, Howard, has spent the last 6 months loudly boasting to the groom's family about how he was personally financing this entire lavish event out of his own deep pockets. He wanted to project the image of a highly successful, powerful patriarch capable of throwing a six-figure party without batting an eye. He told everyone here that he was a true titan of industry. I paused, letting the heavy silence settle over the massive room. I locked eyes with Desmond, who was still standing on the elevated dais next to Brittany. The handsome architect looked incredibly tense, his jaw tightly clenched as he listened to my every word. Desmond was a man who built his life on solid foundations both in architecture and in his personal relationships. He despised liars. I watched Desmond's chest rise and fall with heavy, controlled breaths. He had trusted me completely. He had believed the carefully curated narrative she had spun about her wealthy, supportive family. He had welcomed Howard and Patricia into his home, treating them with the utmost respect and generosity. Now the harsh reality was crashing down upon him. The truth. I continued, my voice steady and completely devoid of emotion, is that my father is completely broke. He secretly stole my corporate credit card information to pay the $50,000 deposit required to secure this very ballroom. This entire luxurious wedding, the imported white orchids, the truffle caviar, the vintage champagne is completely funded by stolen money. He lied to all of you, but most importantly, he lied directly to Desmond and his esteemed family. The reaction was instantaneous and explosive. 200 elite guests erupted into shocked murmurs and furious, chaotic conversations. The sound of their whispering filled the room like a swarm of angry bees. Patricia buried her face in her hands, letting out a loud, dramatic sob as she realized her social standing in Newport was permanently destroyed. She would never be invited to another country club luncheon again. Howard stood frozen in the center of the room, looking like a deer caught in the headlights of an oncoming truck. He was completely humiliated and exposed as a massive fraud. His shoulders slumped and the arrogant, boastful posture he had carried all evening vanished instantly. Winston watched him with an expression of pure, unadulterated disgust. The billionaire recognized a con artist when he saw one, and his judgment was final. Up on the elevated dais, the atmosphere shifted violently. Desmond, a highly principled, incredibly successful man who valued integrity and absolute honesty above all else, slowly stood up from the decorated sweetheart table. He stared down at Brittany, his dark eyes filled with an intense, blazing suspicion. Desmond moved with a terrifying, deliberate slowness that commanded the attention of every person in the massive ballroom. He pushed his heavy silk chair back from the sweetheart table, the wooden legs scraping harshly against the elevated platform. The sound echoed like a gunshot, signaling the complete destruction of the romantic facade. He did not glance at the towering floral arrangements. He did not look at his billionaire father standing by the kitchen doors. Desmond kept his dark, furious eyes locked entirely on his bride. He stepped down the carpeted stairs from the dais, his tall frame moving with a rigid, dangerous tension. His dark tailored suit seemed to absorb the harsh lighting as he marched toward Brittany. She was trembling visibly now, the heavy lace of her custom gown shaking around her legs as she watched her new husband approach. Desmond stopped exactly 3 feet away from her, enforcing a physical boundary that felt completely insurmountable. The air between them crackled with an electric hostility. His voice, when he finally spoke, was dangerously quiet, forcing the surrounding elite guests to lean forward and strain their ears in the dead silence of the room. "Explain it to me right now," Desmond commanded, his tone devoid of the warmth that had characterized his wedding vows just 2 hours earlier. "Explain to me why you sat in my living room 3 months ago, looked me dead in the eyes, and told me your stepsister was a recovering addict, living entirely off your parents' charity. Explain to me why you cried on my shoulder, claiming Clara was a dangerous, unstable person who would cause a horrific scene at our reception. You told me she was not invited to our wedding because she had stolen money from your father to buy illicit substances. You told my mother she was a violent liability who would ruin the aesthetic of our union. You spun this massive tragedy to gain my sympathy and isolate your family from scrutiny. You constructed a phantom menace out of a woman who spends her days building a medical empire and saving lives. You weaponized my empathy against me." Brittany physically flinched at his harsh words. The guests in the front rows gasped loudly, the shocking nature of Brittany's lies rippling outward through the wealthy crowd. Desmond took a single intimidating step closer, towering over her shrinking form. He demanded to know how she could sleep next to him for the past year, while actively burying her sister under character-assassinating lies. He recounted the numerous times he had offered to help Clara, offering to anonymously pay for rehabilitation centers, offering to reach out to his network of medical professionals. Brittany had aggressively shut down every offer, claiming Clara was beyond help and needed to be cut off permanently. Desmond stared at the woman he had just legally married, realizing he had tied his life, his reputation, and his family legacy to a calculating liar. Brittany immediately deployed the only weapon she had left in her superficial arsenal. She manufactured a dramatic, tearful breakdown right there on the polished marble dance floor. Her eyes filled with rapid, well-rehearsed tears that spilled perfectly over her heavily contoured cheekbones. She let out a loud, whimpering sob, her shoulders shaking violently as she stepped toward Desmond. She reached out with both hands, desperate to grab the lapels of his expensive suit jacket, desperate to re-establish the physical manipulation she had relied on for their entire relationship. Desmond recoiled instantly, his expression twisting into pure revulsion. He took a sharp step backward, completely avoiding her grasp as if her touch would burn his skin. He held his hands up, blocking her from advancing any further. The rejection was absolute and public, a physical manifestation of the emotional wall slamming down between them. "Please, Desmond, you have to listen to me," Brittany pleaded, her voice pitching into a high, frantic whine that grated against the ears. "She is lying. Clara is completely lying about everything. She is just jealous. She has always been fiercely jealous of me since we were children. She hates that I am beautiful. She hates that I have a massive online following, and she absolutely hates that I found a wealthy, successful man like you." Brittany pointed a shaking manicured finger toward me, trying desperately to redirect the groom's furious attention away from her own crumbling lies. "Look at her. Look at how plain and miserable she is. She came here tonight specifically to destroy my perfect day because her own life is completely pathetic. She forged those banking documents. She hacked her way into those accounts just to frame my poor innocent father. She is just a bitter monster trying to tear down my happiness." Brittany sobbed louder, looking around the vast room for any sympathetic faces among the 200 guests. She found absolutely none. Even her influencer friends sitting at a designated VIP table nearby were actively filming her humiliating meltdown on their smartphones rather than rushing to her defense. Patricia attempted to run forward to comfort her daughter, but a stern, silent glare from Winston's private security detail kept the stepmother frozen in her tracks. Brittany turned back to Desmond, clasping her hands together in a begging motion, her custom gown pooling around her on the floor like deflated parachute silk. "Desmond, baby, please do not let her ruin our beautiful marriage. We are meant to be together. Do not let her toxic jealousy destroy our future. She is making all of this up to punish me for being the favorite child. You have to believe your wife, Desmond. You promised to protect me. I watched her pathetic performance from across the room with absolute unwavering calm. The adrenaline that had spiked in my veins moments earlier had settled into a frigid, hyper-focused clarity. I did not yell back at her. I did not raise my voice to defend my character or attempt to match her frantic hysteria. I did not need to scream to prove my point. The truth was already fighting my battle for me, dismantling their fraudulent empire brick by brick. Every tear she shed, every frantic accusation she hurled in my direction, only further cemented her guilt in the eyes of the man she was trying to manipulate. I stood tall, my posture relaxed, but commanding a stark contrast to her crumbling state. The desperation in her voice was the sweetest sound I had heard in a decade. The golden child was finally facing the consequences of her actions. I simply reached into the pocket of my navy blue dress and pulled out my smartphone. I unlocked the screen with a swift swipe of my thumb and opened my secure private banking application. The bright screen illuminated my face in the dim ballroom lighting, casting a stark glow against my features. I tapped the screen twice, navigating directly to the encrypted ledger that detailed every single financial transaction tied to my name over the last decade. I also pulled up the undeniable digital footprint of the predatory student loans my parents had forced me into while simultaneously draining my late mother's trust fund to finance Brittany's extravagant lifestyle. The exact math was right there, indisputable and completely legally binding. I held the power to destroy her narrative with a single glowing screen. I did not need to convince anyone with fake tears. The bank statements would do all the talking for me. I stepped forward, leaving the shadow of the swinging kitchen doors completely behind me. I walked confidently onto the edge of the dance floor, my heels clicking sharply against the stone, projecting a terrifying, unbothered authority. I held my phone out, the bright digital ledger visible for anyone close enough to see the staggering numbers and the irrefutable proof of my financial independence. I locked eyes with Brittany, letting a cold, ruthless smile touch the corners of my mouth. I watched the frantic panic in her eyes heighten as I approached, her entire fake reality collapsing under the weight of my absolute silence. I did not need to hurl insults to destroy her. I only needed to state the cold, hard facts of our shared history. Jealous? I asked, my voice carrying clearly and sharply across the silent room without a microphone. The single word echoed against the vaulted ceilings, hanging over the terrified bride like a dark executioner's blade. I let the silence stretch for a fraction of a second, watching the blood completely drain from Brittany's heavily powdered face. I raised the phone higher, the screen glaring like a beacon of absolute financial truth. Jealous of the woman whose luxury lifestyle is funded by my student debt, I held my phone higher. The bright screen illuminated the dark space between Brittany and me, displaying the undeniable reality of my financial burden. The banking application showed a bold red number indicating exactly $150,000 in outstanding educational debt. I did not just show the screen to Brittany. I turned my wrist, ensuring Desmond and his billionaire father Winston had a clear, unobstructed view of the staggering negative balance tied directly to my social security number. Desmond stepped closer, his architectural eye quickly scanning the official loan servicer logo and the massive principal amount. The sharp intake of breath from the grooms signaled that he fully grasped the magnitude of the financial sabotage I was exposing. 10 years ago, I stated, my voice echoing sharply off the vaulted ceilings, my father called me into his home office. I was 18 years old, holding my acceptance letter to a top-tier nursing program. Howard sat behind his heavy oak desk, placed his face in his hands, and delivered a masterful, heartbreaking performance. He told me the family real estate business had hit an unexpected recession. He claimed they were completely drowning in operational debt and faced imminent bankruptcy. I looked his own teenage daughter dead in the eyes and swore they did not have a single dollar left to contribute to my college education. He manipulated my empathy, forcing me to take out maximum federal and private student loans to finance my entire degree, telling me it was the only way to save our family from total ruin. The ballroom fell into a suffocating, absolute silence. The 200 wealthy guests stopped whispering. Waiters stood frozen against the walls. Everyone watched the grotesque family history unfold, captivated by the sheer audacity of the betrayal. I worked graveyard shifts at a local diner while attending rigorous medical classes full-time. I continued my gaze shifting from Desmond to my father. Howard was currently gripping the edge of a dining table, his knuckles white, his chest heaving with trapped, frantic breaths. I exhausted myself completely to cover my basic living expenses because I believed my father was struggling to keep a roof over our heads. I ate cheap instant noodles and skipped meals to ensure I did not add a single cent of burden to his supposedly failing finances. I took a slow, calculated step toward Brittany. She was shaking violently now, her expensive lace gown shimmering under the harsh spotlight. I kept my phone raised, a digital weapon locked and loaded. What my father conveniently failed to mention during his tearful office performance was the existence of an educational trust fund, I announced, ensuring every syllable landed with maximum impact. My biological mother before she passed away from aggressive breast cancer. When I was just a child, had the incredible foresight to establish a protected account specifically designated for my higher education, a trust fund containing exactly $150,000. A sharp gasp rippled through the front row of VIP tables. Winston crossed his powerful arms, his dark eyes narrowing into dangerous slits as he glared at Howard. The billionaire recognized ruthless financial predation, and seeing a father executed against his own grieving child disgusted him beyond measure. That money was legally mine, intended to ensure I started my adult life without the crushing weight of predatory interest rates, I said, my voice dropping into a lethal, frigid register. But Howard was the executor of that trust until my 21st birthday. Exactly 1 week after I signed those binding lifelong student loan documents, Brittany drove up to our house in a brand new fully loaded Mercedes-Benz G-Wagon. Brittany flinched violently, instinctively taking a step backward until her back hit the edge of the elevated dais. She parroted that luxury vehicle all over her social media, bragging about her incredible, generous parents. I continued mercilessly destroying her carefully curated influencer narrative. She claimed it was an early graduation present for finishing a meaningless online marketing certificate. But that car was not a gift from Howard and Patricia. That vehicle was purchased entirely in cash. A cash transaction funded by a direct, unauthorized wire transfer from my deceased mother's educational trust account. You are driving my nursing degree, Brittany. Every designer handbag you bought, every luxury vacation you took, every single aesthetic enhancement you paid for was financed by the money my dead mother left to protect me. Howard finally snapped. The sheer pressure of the public exposure combined with the terrifying glare of the billionaire whose investment he desperately needed completely shattered his remaining self-control. He abandoned his desperate, placating demeanor and erupted into explosive, unhinged rage. Liar Howard screamed, his voice cracking with hysterical fury as he charged forward. He pointed a shaking, accusing finger directly at my face, his skin turning a volatile shade of purple. You are a pathological liar. There was no trust fund. Your mother left nothing but medical debt. You are making this all up because you have always been a bitter, hateful child. You are trying to destroy your sister out of pure spite. Howard lunged toward me, clearly intending to snatch the phone from my hand and smash the digital evidence against the marble floor. Before he could close the distance, Winston moved with shocking speed. The billionaire stepped smoothly into my father's path, using his large, imposing frame to form an impenetrable physical barrier between Howard and me. Winston did not raise his voice. He simply delivered a dark, menacing glare that forced my father to stop dead in his tracks, terrified of crossing a man with limitless power and a dedicated security detail. She is hysterical, Howard shouted, pivoting his frantic attention to Winston, desperate to salvage the shredded remains of his dignity. She has a long history of severe mental instability. She was hospitalized for delusions. You cannot believe a single word she says. Winston. This is a documented psychological episode happening right in front of us. Howard was spiraling, relying on the oldest, most misogynistic tactic in the playbook by attempting to brand a successful, intelligent woman as crazy. But his chaotic screaming only made him look guiltier. Desmond stared at my father with open revulsion, disgusted by the pathetic, flailing attempts to discredit a woman presenting hard, verifiable financial data. Patricia realized instantly that her husband's explosive anger was cementing their guilt in the eyes of the Newport elite. She saw the wealthy guests recoiling from Howard's aggressive outburst. Patricia knew that to survive this social execution, they needed to completely shift the narrative. They needed to weaponize empathy and turn the crowd against me through sophisticated, calculated emotional manipulation. Patricia stepped forward, placing a gentle, restraining hand on Howard's arm. She physically pulled him back, silencing his frantic screaming with a sharp, meaningful look. She took a deep breath, instantly transforming her panic into a masterful display of maternal sorrow. She softened her posture, letting her shoulders slump as if bearing an unimaginable burden. She looked out at the sea of shocked guests, her face the absolute picture of a heartbroken, long-suffering mother. "Please, everyone, I beg you to forgive this terrible disruption." Patricia began, her voice quivering with perfectly manufactured anguish. She reached up to wipe a non-existent tear from the corner of her eye, ensuring the diamond on her finger caught the light. "We have tried so hard to keep this tragic family secret behind closed doors to protect her privacy. But Clara leaves us no choice." Patricia took a hesitant step toward me, holding her hands out in a placating, non-threatening gesture designed to make me look like the aggressor. She looked at Desmond and Winston, addressing them directly with a soft, trembling voice. Clara never recovered from the trauma of losing her biological mother. Patricia lied smoothly, weaving a toxic narrative with practiced ease. The grief completely fractured her mind. She suffers from severe paranoid delusions. She creates these elaborate financial fantasies to cope with her feelings of inadequacy. We have spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on the best psychiatric care, trying to help her heal, trying to bring her back to reality. Patricia let out a ragged, theatrical sigh, scanning the front rows to gauge the crowd's reaction. A few guests susceptible to a wealthy woman's tears began to look at me with hesitation and pity. "There was never a trust fund," Patricia continued, her voice gaining a sickening, persuasive rhythm. "We bought Brittany that car by taking out a second mortgage on our own home because we wanted to reward her hard work." Claire became obsessed with the vehicle. Her illness twisted her memories, making her believe we stole from her. "We have spent years living in absolute terror of these public episodes." She fabricates bank statements, she creates fake legal documents, all driven by a deep, dark obsession with destroying Brittany. "We love her, but she is deeply, dangerously unwell. Please do not let her illness ruin this beautiful union. We just want to get her the psychological help she so desperately needs." Patricia did not just stop at verbal manipulation. She fully committed to her theatrical performance by dropping heavily onto her knees, right there on the polished marble dance floor. The heavy sequins of her expensive designer gown scraped against the stone with a harsh, grating sound. She buried her face in her manicured hands, letting out a series of loud, racking sobs that echoed through the silent ballroom. It was a masterclass in weaponized victimhood. She crumpled her posture, making herself look as small and fragile as possible, desperately trying to evoke the primal sympathy of every wealthy parent in the room. Howard immediately caught on to her strategy. He rushed to her side, dropping to one knee and wrapping a protective arm around her shaking shoulders. He bowed his head, playing the role of the exhausted, heartbroken patriarch who had simply sacrificed everything to manage a deeply troubled, mentally unstable daughter. The performance was sickeningly effective. The elite Newport guests, many of whom had spent their entire lives navigating the treacherous waters of high society gossip and family scandals, began to murmur among themselves. The heavy, suffocating silence of the ballroom gave way to a rising tide of hesitant whispers. Wealthy women in designer gowns exchanged sympathetic glances, nodding slowly as Patricia sobbed. The stigma of mental illness was a powerful destructive tool, and Patricia was wielding it with absolute ruthless precision. In their privileged world, the narrative of a tragically disturbed child lashing out at her loving, affluent parents was a familiar, digestible trope. It was far easier for these socialites to believe that a young woman had suffered a psychotic break than to accept that one of their peers had committed systematic, calculated financial fraud against their own flesh and blood. I watched the tide of public opinion begin to slowly turn against me. A profound, icy disgust settled deep in my stomach. This was exactly how they had controlled the narrative for my entire life. Whenever I had tried to speak up about the emotional abuse, the financial manipulation, or the blatant favoritism, they had immediately branded me as overly sensitive, dramatic, or unstable. They used my genuine grief over my biological mother to paint me as a damaged, unreliable narrator of my own life. Now they were executing that exact same playbook on a grand, highly public scale, attempting to bury the undeniable truth under an avalanche of manufactured maternal tears. Brittany recognized the shift in the room's energy instantly. The golden child never missed an opportunity to capitalize on a favorable dynamic. She let out a loud theatrical whimper and collapsed dramatically against the edge of the elevated sweetheart table. She covered her face, ensuring her massive diamond engagement ring caught the harsh glare of the spotlight. "Desmond," she cried, her voice pitching into a pathetic, trembling whine. "You see what we have to deal with? You see the agony she puts us through. My parents have given up everything to get her the best psychiatric help money can buy, and she repays them by trying to destroy my wedding day. Please, you have to protect me from her. She is sick, Desmond. She does not know what she is doing." Brittany reached out a trembling hand toward the groom, silently begging him to cross the physical distance he had established between them. She wanted him to wrap his arms around her, to validate her victimhood, to shield her from the imaginary monster they had painted me to be. But Desmond did not move a single inch. The brilliant architect stood completely rigid, his dark eyes analyzing the chaotic scene unfolding below him. He looked at the sobbing mother on the floor, the desperately pleading bride, and the aggressively defensive father. Then his sharp gaze shifted directly back to me. Desmond was a man who built towering skyscrapers. He knew how to identify structural instability. He was looking for the cracks in the foundation, waiting to see if I would crumble under the immense, crushing weight of their public gaslighting. Winston remained equally unbothered by the dramatic, weeping spectacle on the dance floor. The formidable healthcare billionaire had not survived decades in the cutthroat private equity sector by falling for cheap emotional theatrics. He kept his muscular arms firmly crossed over his chest, his private security detail flanking him like statues carved from solid granite. Winston did not look at Patricia kneeling on the floor. He kept his intense, calculating focus locked entirely on me. I was testing my resolve. He wanted to see how the chief executive officer of a highly profitable medical network handled a hostile, high-stakes crisis management situation. The pressure in the ballroom was intense, heavy enough to crush coal into diamonds. Every single eye was darting back and forth between the weeping bride, the sobbing stepmother, and me. They expected me to scream. They expected me to lose my temper, to hurl insults, to aggressively defend my sanity. They expected me to validate Patricia's vicious narrative by acting like a frantic, unhinged woman, desperately trying to convince a skeptical crowd that she was not crazy. Because in the court of public opinion, the moment a woman raises her voice to scream that she is sane, she instantly loses the argument. I refused to give them what they wanted. I did not raise my voice. I did not shed a single tear. I did not offer a frantic, desperate defense of my mental health. I stood perfectly straight, my posture reflecting the absolute, unbreakable confidence of a woman who possessed the cold, hard receipts. I looked down at Patricia, watching her shoulders heave with fake sobs. I felt absolutely nothing for the woman who had spent a decade trying to systematically destroy my self-worth. Her tears were nothing more than a cheap, transparent defense mechanism designed to obscure her financial crimes. I calmly slipped my smartphone back into the pocket of my navy blue dress. The sudden movement caught the attention of the murmuring crowd, causing the whispers to taper off into tense, expectant silence. I smoothed the fabric of my skirt with slow, deliberate precision. I did not spare another glance for my father, who was still kneeling on the marble floor, glaring at me with raw, unfiltered hatred. I turned my back on all of them. My sudden physical pivot sent a fresh wave of confusion rippling through the elite guests. They watched in complete silence as I began to walk away from the chaotic confrontation on the dance floor. I did not rush toward the heavy wooden exit doors at the back of the ballroom. I was not fleeing the scene of the crime. I moved with slow, predatory purpose, my heels clicking a steady rhythmic beat against the polished stone floor. I bypassed the scattered tables of stunned socialites, ignoring their wide, staring eyes. I navigated through the labyrinth of massive floral arrangements and crystal centerpieces, charting a direct course toward the far left corner of the massive room. My destination was the elevated audio-visual control station. The professional DJ and the lead technical director had been standing frozen behind their massive soundboards for the last 15 minutes, completely paralyzed by the explosive family drama that had hijacked the wedding reception. They were surrounded by towering stacks of expensive audio equipment, heavy sound mixers, and complex lighting rigs. Directly above their station, suspended from the high vaulted ceiling, were three massive state-of-the-art LED projection screens. Those massive digital displays had been installed specifically for this moment in the evening. They were currently black, sitting dormant, waiting to project the highly anticipated, professionally edited romantic montage of Brittany and Desmond's relationship. The technical director, a young man wearing a black headset and a panicked expression, stepped back nervously as I approached the elevated booth. He looked frantically toward the wedding planner, who was currently hiding behind a pillar, utterly incapable of managing the disastrous turn of events. I reached the edge of the professional soundboard and stopped, leaning slightly over the console to ensure the technician could hear me clearly over the ambient noise of the shocked crowd. I did not ask for permission. I did not explain my intentions. I simply extended my right hand, keeping my palm open and steady. I looked the terrified audio-visual technician dead in the eyes, projecting the same authoritative, commanding presence I used when directing critical trauma responses in the emergency room. "Hand me the primary HDMI cable for the main projection screens," I commanded, my voice sharp, clear, and completely devoid of any hesitation. The technician swallowed hard, his eyes darting from my outstretched hand to the massive black screens hanging above us. He understood immediately that I was about to hijack the entire visual presentation of the wedding. He hesitated for a fraction of a second, his hand hovering over the tangled nest of heavy black cords resting on the soundboard. He looked toward the dance floor, seeing the billionaire groom's father watching the exchange with intense, approving interest. The technician realized quickly that defying me would likely anger the man paying the venue's massive invoice. With trembling fingers, the young man grabbed the thick, braided HDMI cable connected directly to the master visual projection system. He carefully handed the metal connector across the console, placing it firmly into my waiting palm. The heavy cord trailed down to the floor, tethering me directly to the massive digital displays suspended above the ballroom. I grasped the metal connector tightly. I pulled my smartphone back out of my pocket, staring at the blank screen for a fleeting moment. I had prepared for this exact confrontation for weeks, anticipating every single lie, every manipulation, and every desperate deflection my family would attempt to use. I knew Patricia would try to play the victim. I knew Howard would try to deny the theft. I knew they would try to paint me as a delusional, jealous monster to save their fragile, stolen social standing. I reached into the small side pocket of my clutch and retrieved a specialized digital adapter. I clicked the HDMI cable into the adapter, locking the connection with a sharp, satisfying snap. I plugged the adapter directly into the bottom of my phone. The massive blank LED screens suspended above the ballroom flickered instantly, shifting from pitch black to a bright, glaring blue. The sudden burst of light bathed the entire room in a harsh electronic glow, forcing the guests to shield their eyes and look up toward the ceiling. I unlocked my phone, bypassing the banking application I had used earlier. I opened a highly organized, encrypted digital folder I had meticulously compiled over the last month. The folder contained hundreds of high-resolution screenshots, scanned legal documents, and preserved digital communications. I did not need to scream to prove my sanity. I did not need to cry to prove my victimization. I was about to plaster their undeniable, verified criminal activity across three massive screens in 50-point font for 200 of their wealthiest peers to read. I tapped the first file in the folder, executing the final devastating phase of my retaliation. The massive LED screens suspended above the ballroom flickered instantly, shifting from a glaring blue to a blinding white. The sudden illumination cast harsh shadows across the faces of the 200 elite guests. They expected a sweeping cinematic montage, accompanied by a swelling soundtrack. They expected sun-drenched photos of Brittany and Desmond laughing in expensive restaurants. Instead, absolute silence reigned over the sound system. No romantic music played. The only visual on the towering digital displays was a crystal-clear high-resolution projection of a private text message thread. The stark green and gray text bubbles loomed 10 feet tall, making it impossible for anyone in the massive venue to look away or claim ignorance. I had specifically selected a conversation thread between my father and a notorious local loan shark who operated under the guise of a high-risk private lending firm. Howard had grown increasingly desperate in the final weeks leading up to the wedding. His credit lines were frozen, his accounts were overdrawn, and his fraudulent facade was fracturing under the immense financial pressure of financing Brittany's influencer fantasy. I stood firmly at the audio-visual console, maintaining a vice-like grip on my phone. I watched the realization wash over the crowd like a tidal wave of ice water. Wealthy socialites adjusted their designer glasses and squinted at the massive screens, their manicured hands flying to their mouths in collective, unadulterated shock. The text messages were impossible to misinterpret. They were the frantic, pathetic pleas of a completely ruined man attempting to buy his way into a billionaire family using stolen funds and empty promises. At the very top of the glowing digital display, a message from the private lender read clearly, "Howard, your accounts are dry. The catering company just called my office looking for the remaining balance. If you do not wire $20,000 by noon tomorrow, they are pulling their entire staff from the venue. You are out of time, and I am out of patience." Right below that stern warning sat my father's desperate, groveling response, displayed in massive green text that dominated the center of the screen. "I need you to float me one more loan." Howard had typed his panic palpable even through the digital medium. "Send another 20,000 right now. The caterer is threatening to walk, and Brittany will absolutely lose her mind if this wedding falls apart. Just give me 72 hours. I promise you, once Brittany marries Desmond on Saturday, our financial troubles are permanently over. I will leverage his dad's private equity firm to pay you back with maximum interest. Winston has deeper pockets than anyone on the East Coast. Once the marriage certificate is signed, we have unrestricted access to the family vault. Just float me the cash to get her down the aisle." The sheer, calculated, predatory nature of that message hung heavily over the paralyzed ballroom. My father had not just lied about his wealth. He had actively and maliciously targeted Desmond's family, viewing their monumental success not as an inspiring legacy, but as a personal piggy bank to be raided the moment the vows were legally binding. He had treated the groom like a financial hostage, a highly lucrative mark in a desperate last-ditch con job. The silence in the room was no longer just uncomfortable, it was radioactive. Down on the polished marble dance floor, Patricia let out a strangled, breathless shriek. Her theatrical performance vanished instantly. She scrambled backward, the heavy sequins of her designer gown snagging clumsily on the stone floor. She stared up at the massive screens with unbridled terror. The devastating public exposure of their financial crimes broke her completely. Howard stood frozen in place, his mouth opening and closing wordlessly as he stared at his own damning text messages looming 10 feet tall above his head. He looked like a man watching his own execution. Brittany let out a deafening scream. She lunged frantically, her heavy custom-lace gown tangling around her legs. "Turn it off!" Brittany shrieked, her voice cracking violently as she waved her arms wildly toward the elevated audio-visual booth. "Turn that off right now! She is hacking the system. She is projecting fake messages to ruin my life. Desmond, do not look at it. Please do not look at it." But Desmond was absolutely looking. The brilliant principled architect stood completely still on the elevated dais, his dark eyes fixed intensely on the towering digital display. His jaw was clenched tight. He read the massive green text bubble again, absorbing the horrifying reality that his new father-in-law had viewed him purely as a financial mark. The profound violation of his trust was written clearly across his rigid posture. Desmond had built his entire architectural career completely independent of his father's massive wealth, determined to forge a legacy based on his own merit and relentless work ethic. He had loved Brittany because he genuinely believed she shared those same foundational values of humility and honesty. Discovering that she had actively plotted to drain his family's generational wealth while manipulating him with fake tears shattered his heart into jagged fragments. I did not flinch as Brittany continued screaming. I swiped my right thumb across the glowing screen of my phone, transitioning seamlessly to the next piece of visual evidence. The massive LED displays blinked once before projecting a second, even more devastating screenshot. This image was an internal email sent directly from Brittany to Patricia 3 months prior to the wedding. The subject line read simply, "Securing the bag." In the email, Brittany detailed a meticulous, highly manipulative strategy to ensure Desmond remained completely isolated from anyone who might question her fake wealthy background. Make sure Clara is absolutely barred from all pre-wedding events, Brittany had written in the displayed email. Desmond is already asking too many questions about why he has never met her. If he talks to her, she will absolutely ruin the narrative. Just keep telling him she is unstable and violently jealous. I need him fully committed before he realizes Dad is totally broke. Once the ring is on my finger, his family's money becomes my money, and I am never wearing last season's designer collections ever again. The collective gasp that erupted from the 200 elite guests was deafening. The wealthy socialites who had previously murmured in sympathy for Patricia were now staring at Brittany with open, unfiltered disgust. They recognized a ruthless, calculating gold digger, and witnessing the sheer audacity of her written confession disgusted them to their very core. Brittany fell to her knees, clutching her head in her hands, her carefully curated influencer persona shattering into a million irreparable pieces right in front of her most affluent peers. I stood firmly at the console, letting the devastating email linger on the screens for a long, agonizing minute to ensure every single person in the ballroom had adequate time to read Brittany's toxic words. I looked past the sobbing bride and the frantic stepmother, focusing my attention entirely on the front of the room. Winston stood like a towering monolith among the chaos. The 60-year-old healthcare billionaire had not moved a single inch since the first text message illuminated the ballroom. He kept his muscular arms tightly crossed over his broad chest, his immaculate dark suit contrasting sharply with the bright glaring light from the screens above. Winston had built a formidable commercial real estate and medical empire by being ruthless, hyper-vigilant, and absolutely merciless toward anyone who attempted to defraud his enterprises. He possessed a terrifying predatory intellect that allowed him to instantly identify threats and eliminate them with extreme prejudice. Winston was not a man who ever tolerated being viewed as prey. The billionaire had navigated decades of cutthroat corporate espionage, hostile takeovers, and aggressive merger negotiations, emerging victorious every single time because he never allowed anyone to exploit his resources. Seeing a pathetic, financially ruined man like Howard casually plotting to siphon millions from his accounts sent a shockwave of icy rage coursing through his veins. He read the 10-foot-tall text message where my father promised to leverage his private equity firm to pay off illicit debts. He read the email where Brittany outlined a calculated, manipulative plot to drain his family's generational wealth. The mention of his firm being used as leverage triggered his deeply ingrained billionaire business instincts. The absolute sheer disrespect of a bankrupt, desperate con man planning to casually raid his massive family vault awakened a sleeping giant. Winston slowly uncrossed his arms. He lowered his sharp, calculating gaze from the glowing LED screens and turned his massive body deliberately. He locked his dark, terrifying focus entirely onto Howard. The temperature in the massive ballroom seemed to plummet instantaneously as the powerful billionaire took his first heavy, calculated, deliberate step toward the pathetic man who had foolishly attempted to steal his entire empire. He moved with the unstoppable momentum of a tidal wave. The massive crystal chandeliers above seemed to tremble with each heavy footstep he took across the polished marble floor. The 200 elite guests held their collective breath, flattening themselves against the white tablecloths, to ensure they were completely out of his destructive path. Winston did not yell. He did not rush. He simply advanced with a cold, terrifying certainty that made the air in the Newport ballroom feel dangerously thin. Howard scrambled backward like a cornered rat, his rented tuxedo shoes slipping wildly against the smooth stone surface, until his back slammed hard against the edge of the elevated sweetheart table. The billionaire stopped exactly 2 feet away from my trembling father. The physical disparity between the two men was glaringly obvious. Winston stood tall, a formidable titan of industry, with shoulders forged from decades of relentless corporate warfare. Howard was practically shrinking into the floorboards, a bankrupt con artist rapidly running out of oxygen. Winston stared down at the sweating, pathetic figure cowering before him. He did not immediately speak. He allowed the crushing, agonizing silence to stretch over the massive room, letting Howard drown in his own public humiliation while the 10-foot-tall text messages continued to glow brightly from the digital screens above them. Winston slowly reached into the inner pocket of his custom-tailored suit jacket. The entire room watched in absolute terror, entirely unsure of what the formidable patriarch was about to produce. He retrieved a sleek black smartphone and held it loosely in his powerful hand. When Winston finally broke the silence, his deep, resonant voice reverberated through the cavernous ballroom with lethal precision. His tone was not loud, but it carried the absolute, uncompromising authority of a man who held the financial fate of thousands of employees in his hands on a daily basis. Last Tuesday afternoon, Winston began keeping his piercing dark eyes locked solely on my father. You sat across from me in my Manhattan corner office. You drank my imported coffee and you looked me dead in the eye. You handed me a glossy 50-page prospectus detailing a supposedly highly profitable commercial real estate venture. You sat in my building and you boldly asked my private equity firm to inject $20 million in capital into your holding company. You claimed your enterprise was expanding so rapidly that you simply needed additional liquid assets to manage the massive influx of lucrative new contracts. Howard let out a strangled, pathetic whimper. He raised his shaking hands, frantically attempting to placate the furious billionaire looming over him. "Winston, please," Howard begged, his voice cracking violently under the immense pressure. "That business proposal is completely legitimate. The market is just experiencing a temporary fluctuation. I promise you the real estate portfolio is incredibly solid. The text messages on the screen are completely taken out of context. It is just a minor cash flow issue related to the wedding expenses. You are a businessman, you understand how liquidity works. Please do not let this ruin our partnership." Winston let out a harsh, humorless laugh that sounded like grinding stone. "Partnership," the billionaire repeated, letting the word drip with unfiltered disgust. "You fundamentally misunderstand the nature of my business, Howard. I do not partner with desperate scavengers who view my family legacy as a personal bailout fund. I build alliances with people who actually possess integrity and verifiable assets. People like Clara who construct genuine empires through relentless hard work. You, on the other hand, are nothing but a hollow shell, attempting to trade your daughter for a winning lottery ticket." Winston turned his massive frame away from my father and scanned the crowd of shocked socialites. He effortlessly located a sharply dressed man sitting at one of the premier tables near the front of the dance floor. Richard Winston commanded, his voice cutting through the tense atmosphere. The man immediately stood up, buttoning his suit jacket with professional efficiency. This was Richard Evans, the ruthless chief financial officer of Winston's massive private equity firm. Richard had attended the wedding as a respected guest, but his professional instincts were instantly activated the moment his boss called his name. "Run a comprehensive top-down background check on Howard's primary limited liability company," immediately Winston instructed his chief financial officer. "I want every single financial record, every hidden debt, every outstanding lien, and every active court judgment pulled up right now. Use the priority corporate database. Do not leave a single stone unturned. I want to know exactly how much of a financial crater this pathetic man is trying to drag my son into." The chief financial officer nodded firmly, instantly pulling out his own high-end smartphone and rapidly typing commands into an encrypted corporate application. Howard completely collapsed. His knees gave out and he slid down the side of the sweetheart table until he hit the marble floor. No, Howard cried out, his voice echoing pathetically across the silent room. Patricia fell to the floor next to him, burying her heavily contoured face in her hands, realizing that their carefully constructed high society illusion was about to be officially and legally obliterated in front of the most powerful people on the East Coast. The two of them huddled together like terrified criminals, waiting for the judge to read their final, inescapable sentence. The 200 elite guests watched the scene unfold with morbid, absolute fascination. In their exclusive world of wealth and privilege, financial ruin was the ultimate unforgivable sin. Losing money was bad, but faking wealth while actively attempting to defraud a respected billionaire patriarch was a social death sentence. The whispers erupted again, sharp and judgmental. Wealthy women pointed their manicured fingers at Patricia, quietly condemning her cheap, desperate attempts to blend in with old money. Powerful men shook their heads at Howard in complete disgust, recognizing his real estate pitch for the pathetic amateur con job it truly was. It took exactly 4 minutes. 4 minutes of agonizing, suffocating silence, while the chief financial officer scrolled rapidly through the glowing screen of his phone, digesting the raw, verifiable financial data. Every single second that ticked by felt like an eternity for the crumbling family on the floor. Finally, the financial executive looked up, his expression hardening into a mask of pure professional contempt. He walked purposefully across the marble dance floor and handed his smartphone directly to Winston. The billionaire took the device, his eyes scanning the detailed corporate report with rapid, terrifying precision. Winston handed the phone back to his executive and turned his attention back to my father. He spoke with a cold, clinical detachment that was far more devastating than any screaming match could ever be. According to the federal bankruptcy courts, Winston announced, ensuring his voice carried to the very back of the massive ballroom, your primary commercial real estate company filed for Chapter 11, bankruptcy, exactly 24 months ago. Your corporate assets were completely liquidated to pay off a mountain of outstanding vendor debt. You do not own a single piece of commercial property anywhere in this state. Winston took a slow, intimidating step closer to the crumpled, defeated patriarch. You sat in my office and lied to my face, Winston continued relentlessly. You presented falsified financial projections. You fabricated revenue streams that have not existed in over 2 years. You are not a titan of industry, navigating a temporary market fluctuation. You are completely, undeniably broke. You have absolutely zero liquid capital, massive outstanding debts to dangerous private lenders, and you attempted to use my son's marriage as a fraudulent vehicle to access my family vault. You are the very definition of a parasite. The revelation hit the ballroom like a physical shockwave. The wealthy guests gasped collectively, recoiling from Howard and Patricia, as if they were suddenly highly contagious. The masquerade was officially over. The designer suits, the expensive sequined gowns, the boastful stories about luxury vacations, and country club memberships were all completely fake. They were destitute, desperate frauds who had resorted to stealing my corporate credit card and pawning my dead mother's educational trust fund just to keep up appearances. The absolute totality of their financial deception was now public record, verified by one of the most powerful financial executives in the room. Up on the elevated dais, Desmond stood perfectly still. The brilliant principled architect absorbed the devastating financial revelation with a chilling, hyper-focused clarity. He looked down at the sobbing, frantic woman kneeling in her custom $15,000 lace gown. The golden child influencer who had spent the last year bragging about her family's incredible wealth, their successful real estate empire, and their prestigious social standing. Desmond's dark eyes narrowed as he stared at Brittany. The horrifying, undeniable truth slammed into him with the force of a wrecking ball, destroying every single illusion he had held about his bride. Desmond looked at Brittany, realizing her entire wealthy influencer persona and her family's status was a complete fabrication designed to trap him. Desmond moved with terrifying purpose. He stepped closer to Brittany on the elevated dais, completely ignoring the frantic, sobbing mess that Patricia had become on the marble floor below. The handsome architect possessed a quiet, unshakable strength that now radiated pure, concentrated anger. He stopped just inches away from his bride, looking down at the woman he had promised to love and cherish only hours prior. The romantic illusion was dead, replaced by the cold, harsh reality of a massive financial conspiracy. Desmond stared into Brittany's eyes, searching for any shred of the genuine, authentic woman he thought he knew. He found absolutely nothing. He asked her a single pointed question, his voice a low, dangerous rumble that commanded the total attention of every elite guest in the Newport ballroom. "Did you know about this financial scam?" Brittany Desmond demanded, enunciating every single syllable with lethal precision. "Did you actively participate in your father, attempting to bleed my family dry, to fund your fraudulent lifestyle?" Brittany scrambled backward on the platform, her custom lace gown catching awkwardly on her heels. She gripped the edge of the sweetheart table, pulling herself upright. The golden child immediately attempted to deploy her usual highly effective manipulation tactics. She fluttered her long eyelashes, letting a fresh, perfectly timed wave of tears spill down her heavily contoured cheeks. She reached out with trembling hands, attempting to place her palms flat against Desmond's chest, desperately trying to play the role of the oblivious innocent victim who had been completely blindsided by her own corrupt parents. "Desmond, you cannot possibly believe I had anything to do with this," Brittany pleaded, her voice shaking with manufactured terror. She pitched her tone into a high, frantic whine designed to evoke primal sympathy. "I am just as shocked and horrified as you are right now. My father kept all his desperate business dealings completely secret from me. I thought we were genuinely wealthy. I thought my parents were incredibly successful real estate investors. I had absolutely no idea they were bankrupt or stealing from Clara. You have to believe me, my love. You know my heart. I would never betray your trust like this." Desmond batted her hands away with a sharp, definitive motion. He did not buy a single second of her pathetic theatrical performance. He pointed a steady finger directly toward the massive digital displays suspended from the ceiling. The screens were currently blank, but the devastating memory of the projected evidence was permanently burned into the minds of everyone present. "Clara showed us an internal email you sent 3 months ago." Desmond stated, his voice a lethal weapon of pure, inescapable logic. "You wrote a message titled 'Securing the Bag.' You explicitly detailed a calculated malicious strategy to isolate me from anyone who might expose your fraudulent background. You ordered your mother to ban Clara from all wedding events because you knew she held the financial truth. You specifically wrote that once the ring was on your finger, my family's money became your money. Do not stand there and insult my intelligence by claiming ignorance. You orchestrated this entire deception from the very beginning." Brittany froze completely. The undeniable reality of her digital confession cornered her with no possible avenue of escape. The elite guests watching the confrontation whispered furiously among themselves, their judgmental stares burning massive holes into her carefully crafted influencer persona. Stripped entirely of her golden child armor, facing total public humiliation and the absolute destruction of her luxurious future, Brittany experienced a violent psychological fracture. The sweet, innocent facade she had maintained for an entire year shattered violently, revealing the deeply toxic, incredibly narcissistic reality underneath. She stopped crying instantly. The fake tears dried up, replaced by a dark, furious rage that contorted her beautiful features into something genuinely terrifying. She slammed her manicured hands down onto the sweetheart table, knocking a crystal champagne flute onto the marble floor where it shattered loudly. "Fine!" Brittany screamed, her voice losing all its melodic sweetness and pitching into a harsh, grating shriek that made the front row guests physically flinch. "Fine, I knew about the bankruptcy. I knew my father was completely broke and desperate. But it does not matter because I deserve this lifestyle. I deserve every single luxury this marriage provides." The ballroom erupted into shocked gasps. Wealthy socialites clutched their pearl necklaces, utterly horrified by her brazen, unapologetic entitlement. Desmond stared at her, his jaw clenched tight, watching the woman he loved morph into a terrifying stranger. I stood firmly by the audio-visual booth, watching the spectacular, unapologetic self-destruction of the sister who had tormented me for decades. She was handing Desmond the final pieces of the puzzle, confirming every single fear he possessed. Brittany paced across the elevated dais like a caged rabid animal. She gestured wildly at the opulent surroundings, the towering white orchids, the lavish decorations, and the waitstaff standing frozen by the doors. "You think I wanted to live like a pathetic broke loser?" Brittany yelled, pointing a manicured finger directly at Desmond's face. "I have spent my entire adult life cultivating the perfect aesthetic. I built a massive online following. Hundreds of thousands of people look at me every single day and wish they had my incredible life. I am a brand, Desmond. I am a highly valuable commodity. I bring beauty status and an enormous audience to this relationship. I am the face of our future together. You get to stand next to me and look like a winner because I make you look flawless to the rest of the world." She marched right up to Desmond, jabbing a finger aggressively at his chest, completely unhinged by her own monumental narcissism. "You should be down on your knees thanking me for choosing you," Brittany continued, her voice echoing shrilly across the silent, captivated room. "I could have married anyone in this room. I could have easily landed a billionaire on my own merit because I am gorgeous and perfect. But I chose you. I elevated your social standing simply by agreeing to wear your ring and post you on my social media feeds. You owe me the luxury lifestyle I require to maintain my personal brand. If my father needed a few $1 million to keep up appearances and fund this wedding, you should have gladly written the check as a thank you for getting a woman like me." Desmond stood perfectly rigid, absorbing the sheer magnitude of her intense delusion. He looked at her frantic, angry face, the expensive designer dress funded entirely by my stolen corporate credit card, and the arrogant posture of a woman who genuinely believed her physical appearance entitled her to steal generational wealth. He did not yell back. He did not match her chaotic, frantic energy. He maintained his quiet, powerful dignity, which only served to make her look even more chaotic, desperate, and completely unhinged in front of the Newport elite. I watched from the shadows, marveling at how easily she dismantled her own life without me having to say another word. "You are hollow," Desmond said softly. The words were incredibly quiet, but they cut through the tense, heavy air with the precision of a surgical scalpel. "I thought I was marrying a woman with integrity, compassion, and a strong work ethic. I thought we shared the same foundational values about family and honesty. But there is absolutely nothing inside you, Brittany. You are just a beautifully painted shell completely devoid of any morality, character, or genuine human emotion. You view marriage as a calculated financial transaction, and you view people as objects to be ruthlessly exploited for your own gain. I pity you because you will spend your entire life chasing money and online attention to fill a massive void in your soul that can never actually be satisfied." The devastating accuracy of his assessment hit Brittany with incredible physical force. Being called hollow by the powerful man she viewed as her ultimate financial prize pushed her entirely over the psychological edge. Her entire existence was validated exclusively through external approval, unearned wealth, and superficial status. Having all of that stripped away in a matter of minutes and being labeled utterly empty by her groom drove her to the absolute brink of sanity. She lost all remaining sense of self-preservation. The carefully hidden prejudice and deeply ingrained classism that defined her toxic family finally boiled to the surface, completely unchecked by any social boundaries. Brittany snapped. Her face turned a violent, ugly shade of red. She took a deep, ragged breath, her chest heaving with unrestrained fury. Pushed to the absolute brink, realizing she had lost her billionaire meal ticket permanently, she decided to burn the entire bridge down to the ground. She screamed a vile, unforgivable insult at the top of her lungs, ensuring every single person in the massive Newport ballroom heard her true, unfiltered, toxic thoughts. "You should be grateful to marry me!" Brittany shrieked, her voice tearing through the immaculate acoustics of the ballroom like shattered glass. Her face was contorted into a mask of pure, unfiltered arrogance, completely stripped of the sweet influencer persona she had spent years carefully curating. "You and your entire family should be on your knees thanking me for giving you the time of day. Your father might have billions in the bank now, but you are still just new money. You are nothing but jumped-up laborers playing dress-up in my world. Taking my last name, associating with my historic family line, is the only thing that would have ever truly elevated you. We are legacy. You are just a temporary trend. The words left her mouth and slammed into the 200 elite guests with the devastating force of a physical explosion. The implicit prejudice, the deep-seated classism, and the undeniable venomous racial undertones of her statement froze the entire room instantly. The remaining atmosphere in the ballroom evaporated, leaving behind a suffocating toxic vacuum. Waiters holding heavy silver trays stopped breathing, their eyes wide with shock. Wealthy socialites, who had spent their entire lives navigating complex social hierarchies, dropped their crystal champagne flutes. The sound of expensive glassware shattering against the polished marble floor echoed loudly, sounding like distant gunfire, but absolutely no one moved to clean it up. The sheer, unadulterated entitlement of a bankrupt, fraudulent bride, claiming she was elevating a brilliant architect from a self-made billionaire family, was beyond human comprehension. It was a level of delusion so profound and deeply offensive that it defied all logic and reason. The elite guests, seated at the tables closest to the dance floor, physically recoiled from Brittany as if she were carrying a highly contagious disease. These were individuals who understood the quiet power of true legacy, and they recognized immediately that Brittany possessed absolutely none of it. She was exposing the ugly, rotting core of her character for the entire upper echelon of the East Coast to witness. The whispered conversations that had been buzzing just moments before died completely. In their place grew a heavy, palpable disgust. The prominent women who had previously offered Patricia sympathetic glances now looked at the entire family with utter revulsion. By insulting Desmond's family lineage and weaponizing her fake social status, Brittany had crossed a permanent, unforgivable boundary. She had not only confirmed every single financial accusation I had projected onto the massive screens above, but she had also proved that she was fundamentally, irreversibly cruel at her very core. At the front of the room, the reaction from Winston's camp was swift and terrifyingly silent. The billionaire patriarch did not flinch, but his dark, calculating eyes narrowed into lethal slits. He had spent his entire life breaking down barriers, fighting through systemic prejudice, and building a massive commercial real estate and healthcare conglomerate that commanded international respect. He had earned every single dollar through unparalleled intellect and grueling, relentless grit. To stand in a rented ballroom and listen to a financially ruined, manipulative brat degrade his son's heritage and label his powerful family as inferior. New money was the ultimate unforgivable insult. Winston did not need to shout to defend his honor or demand an apology. His absolute stillness radiated a dangerous, commanding power that made the air around him feel dangerously thick and heavily pressurized. Behind the billionaire, his private security detail visibly tensed in perfect synchronization. Four massive, highly trained men in dark, tailored suits shifted their weight simultaneously, stepping half a pace forward toward the dance floor. Their hands moved instinctively toward their communication earpieces, their sharp eyes scanning the room, waiting for a single subtle nod from Winston to clear the entire venue and extract their employers. They recognized the explosive, highly volatile nature of the insult and were fully prepared to physically remove the groom and his family from the toxic environment. The security personnel stared at Howard and Patricia, making it abundantly clear that any sudden movements from the fraudulent family would be met with immediate, overwhelming force. The physical threat was silent, but absolutely guaranteed to be executed. Down on the cold marble floor, the remaining fragments of Howard's and Patricia's sanity disintegrated completely into dust. Patricia let out a horrified, strangled gasp, clapping both of her manicured hands tightly over her mouth to muffle her own terrified sob. She knew instantly that her daughter had just committed permanent social and financial suicide. There was absolutely no recovering from a public, highly prejudiced attack on a billionaire groom's family. Any microscopic shred of a chance they had to beg for mercy, to plead for a quiet financial settlement, or to salvage a fraction of their stolen dignity was instantly incinerated by Brittany's screaming fit. Patricia squeezed her eyes shut, realizing that she would be permanently banished from every country club and high society gathering for the rest of her natural life. Howard slumped fully against the base of the sweetheart table, utterly defeated and completely broken. His face had turned an ashen, sickly gray color, making him look like a man who had just received a terminal diagnosis. His golden child, the specific daughter he had bankrupted himself to elevate the daughter he had deliberately stolen my college fund to pamper, had just destroyed his very last hope of survival. By screaming her toxic entitlement directly at Desmond, Brittany had permanently sealed their tragic fate. They were no longer just viewed as pathetic financial frauds who stole corporate credit cards. They were now publicly exposed as bigots who harbored deep-seated resentment against the very people they were begging for money. Howard buried his face in his trembling hands, wishing the marble floor would simply open up and swallow him whole. I watched the devastating scene unfold from my secure vantage point at the audio-visual console, my hand still resting near the heavy black cable that connected my phone to the massive digital screens. A profound icy calm settled deep within my chest, replacing the years of anxiety and frustration I had harbored. For 32 years I had endured their insidious remarks, their subtle put-downs, and their constant exhausting demands that I make myself smaller so Brittany could shine brighter. They had always operated under the delusional, highly toxic belief that their supposed pedigree made them genetically superior to everyone else, including the very people who built actual tangible success through hard work. Now that exact same poisonous arrogance had trapped them in a prison of their own making, from which they could never escape. I did not feel a single ounce of pity for my sister or my parents. Her vile insult was not a simple mistake born of high stress or wedding day jitters. It was the authentic, unfiltered voice of a woman who had never been taught the value of humility or the harsh reality of consequence. She had spent her entire life believing she was the center of the universe, surrounded by enablers who reinforced her toxic behavior. She genuinely thought her physical appearance and fake social standing gave her the right to belittle a brilliant architect. The universe had finally decided to violently correct her perspective in front of 200 wealthy witnesses, and I was entirely content to watch her drown in the devastating fallout of her own horrific choices. Desmond stood on the elevated dais, absorbing the full venomous impact of her words. He looked at the woman he was supposed to marry, his handsome face completely devoid of any emotion. The shock, the burning anger, and the sharp betrayal that had animated his features just moments ago were entirely gone. In their place was a smooth, impenetrable mask of absolute chilling indifference. He did not look at her with hatred, because hatred required a level of emotional investment that she no longer deserved. He looked at her as if she were a completely foreign, insignificant object that had accidentally wandered into his line of sight and dirtied the beautiful scenery. He saw her clearly for the very first time, a desperate hollow shell clinging to fake prestige and manufactured superiority. The deafening silence stretched on, building a crushing, heavy pressure that seemed to suck all the remaining oxygen directly out of the ballroom. Brittany stood frozen in her custom lace gown, her chest heaving with rapid, shallow breaths. She waited for him to scream, waited for him to fight back, waited for any kind of explosive reaction that would allow her to continue her dramatic, victimized performance. But Desmond offered her absolutely nothing. He maintained his regal, unbothered composure, refusing to lower himself to her vulgar, deeply offensive level. He would not give her the satisfaction of an argument. He slowly, deliberately lowered his gaze from her terrified, panicking eyes and looked down at his own hands. Moving with a calm, methodical precision that sent a fresh wave of absolute shock rippling through the captivated audience, he slowly reached for his left hand. He did not rush the movement, ensuring that every single guest, every security guard, and every member of his family saw exactly what he was about to do. The definitive final motion was the ultimate declaration of his freedom from her toxic grip, a quiet but devastating rejection that spoke far louder than any insult she could have ever hurled in his direction. He wrapped his long, elegant fingers around the thick gold band resting on his left ring finger. The metal caught the harsh glare of the spotlights, gleaming with a brilliant, heavy luster. Just 3 hours ago, under a canopy of imported white orchids and a perfectly curated sunset, Brittany had slid that very ring onto his hand. She had looked into his eyes and recited vows about partnership, loyalty, and eternal devotion. It was all a breathtaking, meticulously rehearsed lie. Desmond did not hesitate. He did not let his hands shake. With a fluid, unbroken motion, he slid the heavy gold band past his knuckle and pulled it completely off his finger. The collective intake of breath from the remaining guests sounded like a sudden vacuum sealing the room. Brittany let out a sharp, pathetic gasp, her hands flying up to cover her mouth as she watched the symbol of her ultimate financial victory detach from her groom. The golden child was witnessing her multi-million-dollar safety net evaporate into thin air. Desmond held the gold ring between his thumb and index finger, suspending it directly in front of her terrified, tear-stained face. My family built our legacy through sweat, honesty, and treating people with dignity, Desmond stated, his voice ringing out with an absolute crushing finality that left absolutely no room for negotiation or debate. We evaluate a person's true worth based on their character, their resilience, and how they treat those who have nothing to offer them in return. You and your parents are nothing but parasites in designer clothes. You feed off the success of others because you are entirely incapable of generating any genuine value yourselves. Brittany physically recoiled as the words struck her. The brutal, unvarnished truth stripped away the last remaining shreds of her influencer facade. She tried to reach out her fingers, trembling wildly, desperately wanting to snatch the ring back from him and somehow force it onto his hand. But she was entirely paralyzed by the sheer, unadulterated contempt radiating from his dark eyes. Desmond turned his attention to the sweetheart table beside them. A pair of tall crystal champagne flutes sat untouched next to their extravagant, untouched floral centerpiece. He extended his hand over the delicate glass designated for the bride. He opened his fingers and simply let go. The heavy gold wedding band plummeted downward. It struck the bottom of the crystal flute with a sharp, piercing clink that resonated through the dead silent ballroom like a final, definitive death knell for their relationship. The ring settled at the bottom of the glass, submerged in expensive, untouched vintage champagne. "This marriage is over," Desmond announced, projecting his voice so the entire venue could hear. "My legal team will have the annulment papers drawn up and filed with the court by Monday morning. You will sign them immediately. Do not attempt to contact me. Do not attempt to contact my family. If you or your fraudulent parents come anywhere near my property or my firm, I will unleash a legal and financial firestorm that will ensure you spend the rest of your miserable lives buried under crushing litigation." Desmond did not wait for her response. He executed a sharp military precision pivot on his heel, turning his broad back entirely on the sobbing woman in the custom lace gown. He walked down the carpeted stairs of the elevated dais, his posture radiating absolute, unapologetic liberation. He had excised a toxic, malignant tumor from his life with surgical precision, and he looked incredibly relieved to be free. Winston watched his son descend the steps with profound, visible pride. The billionaire patriarch uncrossed his powerful arms and gave a single sharp nod of approval. Desmond had handled the ultimate betrayal with the exact kind of ruthless, principled dignity that defined their entire family empire. Winston stepped forward, taking charge of the chaotic environment with effortless, terrifying authority. "We are leaving," Winston commanded, his booming voice echoing off the high vaulted ceilings and shaking the crystal chandeliers. He addressed his massive extended family and his network of elite business associates, all of whom had been watching the spectacular implosion in stunned fascination. "Do not leave a single coat or handbag behind. We do not spend our valuable time breathing the same air as common thieves and pathetic bigots. Everyone out right now." The groom's entire side of the massive ballroom stood up in perfect, unified synchronization. Chairs scraped loudly against the polished marble floor. Wealthy men guided their wives swiftly away from the decorated tables. The exodus was highly organized and entirely devoid of panic. They moved with the calm, deliberate efficiency of powerful people abandoning a condemned building. The billionaire money, the genuine prestige, and the elite social standing that Howard and Patricia had desperately tried to steal were currently walking directly out the exit doors. I stood firmly by the audiovisual console watching the spectacular mass departure. The sheer volume of people leaving created a powerful rushing current of air that made the white tablecloths flutter. Waiters scrambled frantically to get out of the way, pressing their backs against the walls as the titans of industry marched past them. Winston led the procession, his private security detail flanking him closely to ensure absolutely no one from my fraudulent family attempted to approach or beg for mercy. Desmond walked shoulder to shoulder with his powerful father. As they passed the center of the Desmond paused for a fraction of a second and looked over at me. He gave me a short, firm nod of profound respect. I returned the gesture instantly. It was a silent acknowledgement between two professionals who valued truth above all else. We had both survived a massive toxic collision with the exact same manipulative family, and we had both emerged victorious by relying on cold, hard facts. He turned back towards the exit, disappearing into the departing crowd. Within 4 minutes, the opulent Newport ballroom was cut in half. Over 100 seats sat empty. Untouched meals were rapidly growing cold on fine bone china plates. The crushing reality of their total social and financial annihilation settled heavily over the remaining guests. The few people left were Howard and Patricia's associates, now staring at my parents with unconcealed disgust. Nobody wanted to be associated with bankrupt frauds who hurled prejudiced insults at a billionaire family. Up on the dais, Brittany collapsed onto the floor, pulling her knees to her chest and sobbing hysterically into the folds of her ruined $15,000 wedding dress. Patricia remained crumpled on the marble dance floor below, weeping loudly into her manicured hands, mourning the permanent death of her country club aspirations. The golden child and the wicked stepmother were finally experiencing the exact same profound, crushing isolation they had forced upon me for my entire existence. Howard stood alone in the center of the devastated room. His rented tuxedo hung loosely on his frame, making him look incredibly small. He stared at the wooden doors that slammed shut behind the departing family. His chest heaved with erratic breaths. His face shifted from a sickly gray to an explosive shade of dark purple. The absolute magnitude of his failure crashed down upon him. His real estate company was completely bankrupt. His hidden debts to private lenders were now public knowledge. His elaborate plan to siphon millions was permanently destroyed. He had zero cash, zero credit, and zero social standing left to exploit. Howard slowly turned his head. His bloodshot, furious eyes scanned the half-empty ballroom until they locked directly onto me. I was still standing perfectly straight by the elevated audio-visual booth, my smartphone resting securely in my hand, my posture projecting absolute unbothered calm. I had single-handedly dismantled his entire fraudulent empire using nothing but digital receipts and undeniable truth. I had exposed his theft, his lies, and his profound moral bankruptcy to the entire world. The last thread of Howard's sanity snapped. He let out a roar of pure hatred that sounded like a wounded animal. It was a sound devoid of reason. He directed his terrifying rage at the woman who exposed the truth. "You ruined everything." Howard screamed, his voice tearing raw from his throat. The veins in his neck bulged. "You ungrateful monster! You destroyed my life. You destroyed your sister's future. I will kill you." I did not scream. I did not cower. I stood my ground, firmly watching the architect of my childhood misery barreling toward me with intent. Howard charged across the polished marble floor with the reckless desperation of a completely ruined man. His heavy footsteps echoed loudly over the shattered glass scattered around the ballroom. His rented tuxedo jacket flapped wildly behind him as his face turned a volatile shade of crimson. He shoved past a terrified waiter, knocking a silver tray of crystal champagne flutes directly to the ground. The glasses shattered into 1,000 tiny fragments, but Howard did not even blink or slow his violent momentum. His eyes were locked entirely on me, burning with a toxic mixture of absolute hatred and utter humiliation. He raised his right hand, curling his fingers into a tight, trembling fist, fully intending to strike me across the face. He screamed that I was destroying the family, his voice tearing raw and ragged from his throat. I did not move a single muscle, refusing to cower before the man who had tormented my entire youth. I stood firmly by the audio-visual console, keeping my posture perfectly straight, and my expression completely devoid of fear. For decades, Howard had used intimidation and explosive anger to control every single narrative within our household. He expected me to shrink away, to apologize, to burst into tears, and beg for his forgiveness. But I was no longer the frightened teenager who relied on his conditional, highly toxic affection for survival. I was the chief executive officer of a massive healthcare network, a woman who made life or death decisions daily. His physical aggression was nothing more than the pathetic, flailing tantrum of a bankrupt con artist losing his final grift. Before his heavy fist could even come close to making contact with my skin, a towering figure blocked my vision. Desmond moved with shocking explosive speed, stepping directly into my father's destructive path with unwavering protective resolve. The brilliant architect, who had just completely dismantled his own fraudulent marriage, transformed instantly into an impenetrable human shield. Desmond raised his broad shoulders, bracing his muscular frame to absorb the incoming impact of Howard's reckless, violent charge. He did not shout or raise his fists, but his physical presence radiated a lethal, uncompromising warning to back away immediately. Howard was too blinded by his own uncontrollable rage to register the massive roadblock standing firmly in his way. He collided heavily with Desmond's chest, letting out a sharp grunt of pain as his momentum was instantly halted. Desmond stood like a solid brick wall, his dark eyes glaring down at the pathetic man attempting to assault a woman. But Desmond did not even have to retaliate because Winston's highly trained private security detail had already mobilized into action. Four massive men in dark tailored suits descended upon the chaotic scene with terrifying absolute military precision. They bypassed the screaming guests and the frozen catering staff, moving as a completely synchronized, highly lethal tactical unit. The lead security guard tackled Howard from the side, striking his torso with the brutal force of a speeding locomotive. Howard was instantly lifted off his feet, his arms flailing wildly in the air as he lost all physical control. The guard drove him forcefully downward, slamming my father's back hard against the cold, unyielding marble floor of the ballroom. The sickening thud of the impact echoed sharply, instantly silencing the remaining murmurs of the horrified, wealthy elite guests. Two more security guards dropped heavily onto Howard, efficiently pinning his thrashing limbs tightly to the polished stone surface. One guard pressed a heavy knee firmly between Howard's shoulder blades, completely immobilizing the frantic, screaming patriarch within seconds. Howard gasped desperately for air, his face smashed awkwardly against the marble, his manicured hands pinned uselessly behind his back. He spewed a stream of vicious profanities, kicking his rented tuxedo shoes wildly, refusing to accept his total physical defeat. The lead guard applied a fraction more pressure, delivering a low, stern warning that immediately forced Howard to stop thrashing. Across the devastated ballroom, Patricia let out a blood-curdling, hysterical shriek that sounded like shattering glass tearing through the air. She watched her husband, the man she relied upon to fund her extravagant social climbing, get manhandled like a common street criminal. Patricia scrambled forward on her hands and knees, desperately trying to reach the pile of men restraining her ruined husband. A fourth security guard smoothly intercepted her, stepping firmly into her path and holding up a large, unyielding hand to block her. Patricia collapsed against a decorative marble pillar, weeping uncontrollably as her heavy, expensive makeup ran in dark streaks down her face. She clawed frantically at her sequined designer gown, realizing that her reputation among the Newport high society was permanently, irrevocably destroyed. Meanwhile, up on the elevated dais, Brittany remained entirely consumed by her own shallow, profoundly narcissistic tragedy. She completely ignored the violent takedown of her father, failing to spare a single glance for the man pinned to the floor. Instead, the golden child sat in a sticky puddle of spilled vintage champagne, surrounded by the shattered remains of expensive crystal flutes. She pulled aggressively at the torn, delicate lace of her custom $15,000 wedding gown, sobbing with intense, self-centered agony. She wailed over the ruined silk and the stained pearls, mourning the absolute destruction of her carefully curated influencer aesthetic. Brittany did not care that her family was facing criminal fraud investigations or that her parents were currently destitute and homeless. She only cared that her perfect, highly monetized wedding photographs were ruined and her billionaire meal ticket had walked out the door. The stark contrast between my father fighting security and my sister weeping over wet fabric highlighted the profound sickness of their dynamic. They were a fractured, deeply toxic collection of individuals who only valued each other based on proximity to money and social power. Winston stood a few feet away, keeping his powerful arms crossed over his chest, watching the pathetic display with pure disdain. The formidable billionaire gave a brief, sharp nod to his security team, signaling them to hold Howard firmly in his pinned position. The massive ballroom, once filled with joyous celebration and arrogant laughter, now resembled an active crime scene locked down by private security. I took a slow, deep breath, letting the chaotic adrenaline fade from my system, replacing it with cold, calculated, absolute precision. I stepped out from behind the protective shelter of Desmond's broad back, moving smoothly into the open space of the dance floor. I placed a gentle, deeply appreciative hand on Desmond's shoulder, offering him a silent, respectful thank you for his immediate, selfless intervention. He nodded tightly, keeping his dark eyes locked on the restrained man on the floor, ensuring the physical threat was completely neutralized. I walked slowly toward my father, my heels clicking a steady, rhythmic, terrifying beat against the polished marble surface of the room. I stopped just inches away from where his face was pressed heavily against the cold stone, looking down at his sweating purple features. Howard glared up at me, his eyes wide and bloodshot, filled with a toxic combination of absolute venom and complete undeniable defeat. He gritted his teeth, attempting to spit another vicious insult in my direction, but the heavy knee on his back silenced his words. He was utterly powerless, stripped of his fraudulent wealth, stripped of his social standing, and now physically stripped of his aggressive, intimidating mobility. I looked down at him with pure clinical detachment, feeling absolutely no sympathy for the man who had gleefully mocked my existence. I had survived his emotional torment, built my own massive empire from scratch, and returned to dismantle his stolen kingdom with absolute perfection. The crushing silence in the ballroom demanded a final definitive conclusion to the spectacular, devastating public execution of his fake, arrogant persona. This was the exact moment I had envisioned when I first discovered the staggering extent of his financial manipulation. He had gambled my future to sustain his superficial pride, operating under the severe, narcissistic delusion that I would forever remain his passive victim. His reckless greed finally summoned the severe consequences he spent his entire adult life running away from. I slowly reached my right hand into the tailored inner pocket of my sleek navy blue blazer, feeling the crisp edge of paper. My fingers wrapped securely around a thick, heavy manila envelope that I had meticulously prepared and sealed exactly 3 days prior to tonight. I pulled the envelope out slowly, holding it up high under the glaring lights so Howard could see the stark white legal label. The document gleamed ominously, a final lethal financial weapon waiting to be deployed against the man who had stolen my corporate credit card. I locked eyes with my father, delivering the ultimate, inescapable death blow to his fragile, pathetic, completely bankrupt ego with absolute chilling calm. Since we are airing out family business, Dad, there is one last piece of mail you need to read. I stepped closer to my father, who was still pinned firmly against the cold marble floor by Winston's security detail. The sharp, rapid clicking of my heels echoed through the cavernous, nearly empty ballroom, a slow, methodical countdown to his absolute financial execution. The remaining elite stragglers, those morbidly fascinated individuals who could not tear themselves away from the spectacular destruction of a fake empire, leaned in closer. They watched with bated breath as the final, devastating chapter of this familial betrayal unfolded. Howard struggled against the heavy pressure of the security guard's knee, his face twisted in a pathetic mixture of desperate rage and raw terror. Patricia wailed incoherently from her spot against the decorative pillar, while Brittany continued her self-absorbed sobbing over her ruined dress, utterly blind to the monumental collapse happening just inches away from her. I stopped right beside my father's head. I looked down at him with an expression of pure, unadulterated ice. There was no sadness left in me. There was no lingering, desperate need for his approval. The scared, isolated girl who had begged for his affection and financial support was completely dead and gone, replaced by a ruthless, fiercely intelligent CEO who understood exactly how to wield legal and financial power. I slowly pulled the heavy manila envelope from the inner pocket of my tailored blazer. I held it out so the stark white legal label caught the harsh glare of the overhead lighting, ensuring every person watching could see the unmistakable seal of a major financial institution. I did not toss the envelope carelessly. I dropped it with deliberate, heavy precision, letting it land squarely on Howard's chest. The solid smack of the thick paperwork hitting him resonated with finality. I didn't just come here tonight to get my $50,000 catering deposit back, Dad, I announced, ensuring my voice was loud, clear, and perfectly steady, projecting an absolute, unshakable authority. I didn't just come here to expose your fraudulent real estate pitch to a billionaire, or to stop Brittany from draining Desmond's generational wealth. Those were just the necessary prerequisites. I came here tonight to settle a 20-year-old debt. Howard strained to turn his head, his bloodshot eyes darting frantically from the heavy envelope resting on his chest to my cold, unforgiving face. He tried to speak, but the words caught in his throat, choking on his own panic. Yesterday morning, my corporate legal team executed a highly complex financial maneuver on behalf of Apex Concierge Care. I continued my words, striking him like physical blows. We specialize in acquiring distressed assets to expand our regional medical facilities. My acquisitions department recently purchased a massive portfolio of highly toxic, deeply delinquent debts from the primary local bank that handles your personal finances. They were practically giving the portfolio away, desperate to offload the massive liabilities caused by bankrupt con artists just like you. Patricia let out a strangled, horrifying shriek, instantly comprehending the terrifying magnitude of my words. She scrambled forward on her hands and knees, desperately trying to snatch the manila envelope off Howard's chest, but the security guards swiftly intercepted her, holding her back with firm, unyielding efficiency. "Congratulations, Dad," I said, a razor-thin, lethal smile touching the corners of my mouth. "I now legally own the primary mortgage to the sprawling 5-bedroom suburban mansion you are currently occupying. The same massive house where you forced me to live in the cramped, freezing attic so Brittany could have a massive walk-in closet for her designer clothes. The same house where you told me I was a worthless financial burden while you actively drained my deceased mother's educational trust fund. I own every single square foot of it." Howard let out a pathetic, guttural groan, realizing the inescapable trap he was caught in. The absolute staggering totality of his ruin crashed down upon him. He had spent his entire adult life desperately clawing his way up the social ladder, manipulating everyone around him to secure a luxury property he could not actually afford. Now the very daughter he had systematically abused and discarded held the legal deed to his entire fake existence. And because you spent the last 6 months aggressively prioritizing your fraudulent real estate pitches and secretly funding Brittany's extravagant influencer wedding. I added, my voice dripping with cold, clinical satisfaction. You completely neglected your primary financial obligations. You are currently 4 months behind on your mortgage payments. You are in severe, undeniable default. According to the strict, legally binding terms of the foreclosure proceedings, my attorneys finalized yesterday afternoon, you have exactly 30 days to completely vacate my property. The ballroom erupted into chaotic, furious gasps from the remaining stragglers. The sheer ruthless brilliance of the financial checkmate left them completely stunned. I had not just embarrassed my toxic family. I had systematically, legally, and permanently stripped them of every single asset, every shred of fake social standing, and the very roof over their heads. I had executed a flawless, devastatingly precise corporate takeover of their entire fraudulent lives. "You cannot do this to us!" Patricia screamed, her voice tearing violently through the silent room. She thrashed against the security guard's restraining arm, her heavy, expensive makeup completely ruined her carefully styled hair, sticking to her sweating face. "We are your family, Clara. You are our daughter. You cannot throw your own parents out onto the street. We will be absolutely destitute. We have absolutely nothing left. You are destroying us over a petty grudge." "A petty grudge," I repeated, turning my frigid gaze directly onto Patricia, pinning her to the marble floor with absolute disdain. "You forced an 18-year-old girl to take on $150,000 in predatory student debt while you bought your golden child a luxury vehicle with my dead mother's money. You spent a decade mocking my medical career, calling me a pathetic bedpan cleaner to elevate your own fake social status. You actively plotted to steal millions from a billionaire family, and you expected me to sit in the corner and silently absorb your abuse forever. I am not destroying you, Patricia. I am simply holding you legally and financially accountable for the devastating destruction you actively chose to inflict upon me. Brittany finally stopped sobbing over her ruined custom lace gown long enough to process the horrifying reality of the situation. The golden child looked up her heavily contoured face, a mask of pure, unadulterated terror. She realized she had lost her billionaire groom, her expensive social media aesthetic, and the luxurious family home she planned to return to. She was completely, utterly broke with no skills, no massive trust fund to fall back on, and no rich husband to exploit. She stared at me, her eyes wide with frantic, desperate disbelief. Clara, please, Brittany begged, her voice trembling with a pathetic, manufactured fragility. Please do not do this. I am your sister. Where are we supposed to go? How are we supposed to live? I do not have any real money. I do not have a career. You cannot just leave us homeless. Please, I will do anything. I will apologize publicly. I will tell everyone the truth. Just let us stay in the house. Please, Clara. I looked at Brittany, evaluating her desperate, hollow plea with the same clinical detachment I used to assess critical medical charts. I saw a profoundly toxic, deeply narcissistic woman who was only sorry because she had finally been caught and violently stripped of her unearned privilege. She did not regret her cruelty. She only regretted the severe, crushing consequences. You have 30 days to figure it out, Brittany, I stated firmly, offering absolutely zero sympathy or comfort. I suggest you start packing immediately. And if you attempt to remove a single fixture, damage any property, or steal anything that does not explicitly belong to you, my corporate legal team will press aggressive criminal charges for destruction of property and theft. Do not test my resolve on this. I will absolutely ruin you in a court of law. I turned my back on the screaming, sobbing, completely ruined family, crumpled on the marble dance floor. I did not spare them another glance. I had delivered the ultimate devastating consequence, and I was entirely finished wasting my valuable time on people who viewed me as nothing more than a convenient punching bag and an unauthorized credit line. The toxic chapter of my life was officially, legally, and permanently closed. I walked toward the heavy wooden exit doors of the massive ballroom, my posture projecting absolute unbroken strength. Desmond and Winston were standing near the exit waiting for me. The billionaire patriarch and the brilliant architect had witnessed the entire flawless execution of my financial retaliation, and they both radiated profound, unmistakable respect. They recognized a woman who possessed the immense intellect, the terrifying capability, and the absolute moral clarity to dismantle a fraudulent empire with ruthless efficiency. Desmond fell into step beside me, his dark tailored suit immaculate, his left hand completely bare of the heavy gold wedding band he had discarded earlier. He did not look back at the weeping bride he had left on the floor. His focus was entirely forward, moving away from the toxic illusion and toward a future built on genuine integrity and truth. Winston flanked my other side, his powerful, imposing presence serving as an impenetrable billionaire shield against any last-minute, desperate attempts from my ruined family to approach us. We walked shoulder to shoulder out of the extravagant, imported, flower-filled ballroom, leaving the shattered remains of Howard's fake dynasty far behind us. We stepped out into the cool, refreshing Newport night air, the heavy, suffocating tension of the wedding reception instantly dissolving. I took a deep, cleansing breath, feeling an incredible, overwhelming sense of absolute liberation wash over me. I had protected my peace, reclaimed my power, and delivered an unforgettable, crushing lesson in accountability. The ultimate, sweetest revenge was not just destroying their fraudulent lives, but walking away into my own massively successful, deeply authentic future, completely unbothered and spectacularly victorious. 3 months passed since the spectacular implosion of my fraudulent family in that imported flower-filled ballroom. The frantic screaming and desperate pleas for mercy felt like a distant memory. I sat behind my massive mahogany desk in my sleek corner office in the heart of Manhattan. The floor-to-ceiling windows offered a commanding view of the New York City skyline, a daily reminder of the towering empire I had meticulously constructed. The air in my office was incredibly still, smelling faintly of expensive espresso. There was no chaos here. There were no toxic manipulations and absolutely no degrading comments about my profession. I had fortified my personal boundaries, creating an impenetrable fortress of peace. My medical network, Apex Concierge Care, had seamlessly finalized the $15 million merger with Winston's private equity firm. Our operational capacity tripled in 90 days, allowing us to deploy critical medical logistics across the eastern seaboard. I was an undisputed industry titan. A flat-screen television mounted on the far wall of my office silently broadcasted a popular national morning news program. I glanced up from my digital tablet, just as a familiar, heavily diminished face flashed across the high-definition screen. The entertainment segment ran a ruthless, highly publicized follow-up story on the spectacular downfall of a disgraced social media influencer. Britney's carefully curated online persona had completely evaporated overnight. When the catastrophic details of her massive financial fraud and her vicious prejudiced outburst at her wedding leaked to the public, her sponsors dropped her with blinding speed. Every luxury brand and cosmetic partnership immediately severed all ties, desperate to distance their pristine corporate images from her toxic reputation. The news anchor narrated over a blurry, candid cell phone video taken by a random shopper. The grainy footage showed Brittany standing behind a worn plastic counter in a dimly lit retail store. She wore a highly unflattering polyester uniform, furiously ringing up discounted merchandise for impatient customers. The golden child who had arrogantly demanded a billionaire lifestyle simply for existing was now working grueling minimum wage shifts just to afford basic groceries. There were no ring lights and absolutely no wealthy men lining up to rescue her. The news segment seamlessly transitioned to provide a grim update on the masterminds behind the fraudulent wedding scheme. Howard and Patricia had utterly failed to magically produce the money required to save their foreclosed suburban mansion. True to my absolute word, my corporate legal team legally evicted them from my property exactly 30 days after the Newport reception. The disgraced couple had been stripped of their luxury vehicles, their country club memberships, and their stolen social standing. The broadcast displayed a brief, depressing shot of a cramped, rundown apartment complex on the outskirts of the city, reporting that the formerly affluent couple was now renting a tiny unit with peeling paint and faulty plumbing. But their severe downgrade in living conditions was the absolute least of their terrifying problems. The news anchor confirmed that federal authorities had officially launched a massive, coordinated investigation into Howard's fabricated commercial real estate pitches and his extensive history of illegal wire fraud. They were currently drowning under mountains of crippling legal fees, facing the very real prospect of spending their twilight years sitting inside a federal prison cell. I picked up the remote control and firmly pressed the power button. The television screen faded to black, instantly shutting off the pathetic reality of the family I had successfully excised from my life. A sharp professional knock echoed lightly against my heavy glass office door. "Come in," I called out, my voice steady and welcoming. The heavy door swung open, and Desmond strode confidently into the expansive room. The brilliant architect looked incredibly healthy, revitalized, and completely unburdened. The heavy dark tension that had clouded his handsome features during the final months of his fraudulent engagement had completely vanished. He moved with the effortless, powerful grace of a man who had successfully dodged a monumental life-destroying bullet. Desmond was not visiting my office as a romantic interest. The intense, highly stressful trauma we had mutually survived in that Newport ballroom had forged something far more valuable and incredibly rare between us. We had become fierce, deeply respected business partners. He walked directly over to my mahogany desk, carrying a large, heavy leather portfolio tucked securely under his strong arm. He unrolled a massive set of highly detailed architectural blueprints, spreading the thick blue paper smoothly across my immaculate desk. "These are the finalized structural schematics for the new trauma wing at the flagship Apex Concierge Care facility," Desmond announced, his deep voice vibrating with genuine professional pride. I have integrated every single logistical requirement your medical team requested, optimizing the layout for maximum efficiency and patient privacy. I leaned forward, my eyes scanning the brilliant, meticulously drafted architectural designs. Desmond had perfectly captured my ambitious vision, designing a medical facility that would revolutionize private emergency care across the entire city. I reached for my solid gold fountain pen, feeling the cool, heavy metal resting perfectly between my fingers. I signed my name at the bottom of the master blueprint with a bold, uncompromising flourish, officially authorizing the multi-million-dollar expansion of my empire. It is perfect, Desmond, I stated, looking up to meet his dark, respectful gaze. Let us break ground immediately. Desmond nodded firmly, rolling the heavy blueprints back into a secure cylinder. We exchanged a brief, powerful look of mutual triumph before he turned and exited my office, ready to bring our shared vision to life. I stood up from my heavy leather chair and walked slowly over to the massive floor-to-ceiling windows. I looked out over the glittering, sprawling expanse of the New York City skyline. The towering skyscrapers reflected the bright, unyielding morning sun. I had successfully protected my peace, reclaimed my power, and built an untouchable empire entirely of my own making. The ultimate sweet revenge is a life lived beautifully.